Just to let any viewers joining us know, the main headline, of course, is that the report has been released and it finds that Boris Johnson deliberately misled Commons. The Privileges Committee has concluded that Boris Johnson deliberately misled the House of Commons, committing a serious contempt. And their recommendation was that Boris Johnson should be suspended from the House for 90 days. And they add that they recommend he should not be entitled to a former member's pass. Now, as Jonathan mentioned, these are pretty heavy sanctions. But Jonathan, if I've still got you, what some of the detail that we were looking forward to seeing in this report, of course, based on Boris Johnson's defence, is how do you prove intent? Because one of the key words here was deliberately misled Parliament, and part of Boris Johnson's defence was that none of this was deliberate.
Yes, the overall aim of the committee was to establish whether Boris Johnson misled the House of Commons, but he himself accepts in hindsight that the statements he said in the House of Commons at the dispatch box were misleading. But he says that he was saying what he believed to be true at the time, and only since events have been documented and details have come to light can they be said to be deliberately or inadvertently misleading. And the committee's definition here, which is important to remember at this point as we go through the report, was whether Boris Johnson misled the House of Commons inadvertently, recklessly or intentionally. So did he do it by mistake, effectively? Did he do it because he wasn't really across the detail and hadn't appraised himself of the facts as he should have done? Or was it deliberate? Was it a deliberate attempt to mislead MPs? And we'll go through the detail of the report to see what it has to say on that. But I just wanted to draw your attention at this early stage to here where the committee sets out its possible punishments that it can recommend to Boris Johnson as available to it. Either no further action, running through several options, rising in severity, requiring an apology in writing, right up to recommending expulsion from the House. And if we can go through now here to point 210, and this relates to Boris Johnson's statements in the House of Commons, I think I'm right in saying, and the assessment that the committee has come to there. They say we have concluded above that in deliberately misleading the House, Mr Johnson committed a serious contempt. Now, you'll hear that word a lot today, contempt of Parliament. It effectively means getting in the way or obstructing the workings of Parliament, the proper democratic process. And it's a very severe offence, about as severe as it can get in parliamentary terms. The contempt was all the more serious, the committee says, because it was committed by the Prime Minister, the most senior member of the government. There is no precedent for a Prime Minister, they say, having been found to have deliberately misled the House. He misled the House on an issue of the greatest importance, the committee says, to the House and to the public, and did so repeatedly. He declined our invitation to reconsider his assertions that what we had said to the House was truthful. His defence to the allegation that he misled was an ex post facto justification and no more than an artifice. He misled the committee in the presentation of his evidence. So some very strong, very critical, very damning language there at the crucial part of this report where they explain their justification for asserting that Boris Johnson deliberately misled the House.
We are waiting to hear what Boris Johnson's response will be. He has promised that it will be a hearty one. But looking back to when he stepped down as a Tory MP, of course, he had been given advance sight of this report. So just talk us through what we've heard from Boris Johnson already.
Sure, if you give me a second, I'll be able to give you Boris Johnson's response to this report today, which we actually have had this morning. But Jess, you're right to highlight what he said already, because he's tried to get his version of events in early. He was sent a draft copy of the findings of the report, and he said that he was bewildered at what he saw as the findings of a kangaroo court and a political hit job. We have a response from Boris Johnson to the final publication of the report this morning, and I'll read you it now. It's a fairly lengthy response, but it is now many months, Mr. Johnson says, since people started to warn me about the intentions of the Privileges Committee. He goes on to say, they told me that it was a kangaroo court and that that it was being driven relentlessly by the political agenda of Harriet Harman. That's the Labour chair, veteran Labour MP chairing the Privileges Committee. And he goes on to say, supplied with skewed legal advice with the sole political objective of finding me guilty and expelling me from Parliament. So essentially challenging the legitimacy of this committee. In his response, they also warned me that most members had already expressed prejudicial views, especially Harriet Harman, in a way that would not be tolerated in a normal legal process. Just excuse me for reading this off a screen here. It's a very lengthy response, so I'm not going to give you all of it, but you get a flavour of Boris Johnson's response there to the damning findings of this report. But I think in hearing Mr. Johnson's response this morning, which is typically bullish and in line with everything he has said up until this point, trying to challenge the authority and legitimacy of this committee, we don't lose sight of the critical language that the MPs have used here and a finding that I don't think we've seen the like of in the history of these, the Privileges Committee certainly, but any parliamentary investigation into a member of the House of Commons conduct, certainly for a former Prime Minister, as the committee highlights here, to have been found to have deliberately misled the House on an issue, they say, of the greatest importance to the House and to the public, and did so repeatedly.